Good morning. It is Thursday, the 9th of July. I'm Maeve McMahon and this is Europe Today, your morning fix of European news and analysis, live here on Euro News. Coming up, in signs the US-Israel war with Iran may be entering a dangerous new phase, Donald Trump says the ceasefire is over. The US launched new strikes on Iran overnight and the conflict dominated the NATO summit in Ankara, where Donald Trump also met Volodymyr Zelensky and announced Ukraine will be granted a licence to produce Patriot missile interceptors. Also, EU finance ministers are gathering today as the IMF has issued a new report warning inflation could rise faster than expected. The fund points to higher energy and commodity prices driven by growing tensions in the Middle East. Meanwhile, as temperatures climb across northern Europe once again this weekend, new data confirms June was the hottest June ever recorded across Europe and the world's oceans. Scientists say the Omega block claimed around 3,700 lives here in Belgium, France and the Netherlands and took a heavy toll on ecosystems, agriculture and labour productivity while fueling destructive storms, drought and wildfires. But first to Ankara, where the much anticipated NATO summit has come to a close with record spending commitments for Europe and Ukraine. But the mood was dampened by the US President Donald Trump declaring the ceasefire over in Iran and reigniting his demand to control Greenland. For more, let's bring in our NATO correspondent, Shona Murray, who's been following the summit all week for us.
Well, good morning, Maeve. Look, we know that the object of this summit really was for NATO allies in Europe and Canada to prove that they're on a credible path to spending 5% of GDP on defence by 2035, as agreed at the last NATO summit. And I think we can say that they achieved that part for sure. We saw at the NATO Industry Defence Forum, there was $50 billion committed to of new capabilities when it comes to submarines, aircraft, ammunition, interceptors, all very important to protect the European continent as well as the Arctic in the medium to long term. There was also this NATO drone edge, which is drones and anti-drone technology, which also includes the recruitment and training of pilots for use all across NATO territory. Very important at the moment because we see all these drone incursions taking place across the Baltics and Poland and other parts of NATO. In addition, we saw Donald Trump having a better relationship with Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, and appeared to approve the Ukrainians the licence to manufacture their own Patriot defence systems, which is very important in terms of the Ukrainian air defence. But as with Donald Trump, you're only one sort of issue away from the whole summit being upended. And we nearly had that because when he arrived, he castigated his allies over the war in Iran. And he also made the comment that the United States would like to control Greenland over Denmark. Take a listen to John Bolton, his former national security advisor, saying that Donald Trump does this just to court controversy.
He's trolling people, as they say. In the first term, I was in his office once. He was dictating a tweet, and he told the person typing the tweet, capitalize all the letters in that last sentence, which a lot of people, drives them. It just is very, very distracting for people. And he turned and said to me, do you know why I just said that? And I said, no, why? And he said, because it drives them crazy. So why does he talk about taking Greenland? Because it drives them crazy. That's what it's about.
So that was John Bolton, Donald Trump's former national security advisor, making the point that Donald Trump makes these outlandish statements in order to create division. But we have to listen to the Prime Minister of Denmark as well yesterday, Mette Frederiksen, and she made the point that Denmark takes these comments very seriously. She said that Denmark was ready to protect all of Danish, Greenlandish and NATO territory, but she called on the United States to respect the sovereignty of Greenland and Denmark. And I think it's worth also pointing out that the Prime Minister of Greenland just a few months ago said that when he met the US envoy to Greenland, that the United States had not changed a position when it comes to taking over or having Greenland. So this is still an issue that is particularly ongoing and should be taken seriously. I think that's the point as well. Maeve?
OK, Shona Murray, thank you so much for that update there from Ankara. And now to dive deeper into the outcomes of that NATO summit, we can bring in Jamie Shea, former NATO security advisor who spent many years here in the headquarters of NATO in Brussels. Jamie Shea, thank you so much for joining us. Curious to hear your view. Was this a successful NATO gathering?
I think, yes, ultimately it was. And good morning to you too. And thanks for having me on the show. It ended better than it started. Clearly, Trump was in a more friendly mood towards the alliance in the private meeting. And I suppose that's the one that really counts than in some of his public remarks. For example, he did say that the US is staying in the alliance. And somebody like Trump hearing that is not always to be taken for granted. He signed off on a communique, which may not be the most interesting thing for the media, but it's important for diplomats. The official text where the US committed itself to NATO Article 5 collective defence and called it ironclad. These were the kind of things that the Allies wanted to hear. And of course, he also showed some satisfaction, unsurprisingly, with the fact that his message on defence spending has been heeded. Mark Rutte and the other allies were at pains to point out that over the last year, Europe and Canada have spent 11% more on defence. The figure now is about an extra $250 billion over the last 2 years on military budgets. So although 5 allies out of the 32 today are on that 5% target, so there's still a long way to go. Allies have until 2035, but all of them practically, with a few laggards, are moving in the right direction. So the summit was designed, of course, to be a Trump-pleasing summit by showing that the responsibility for NATO is moving both financially and militarily onto Europe. So I think, yes, so, people were expecting a rough ride with Trump. You always get that. But as they said about Wagner's music, it's better than it sounds. And I think it ended up on a more positive note than people had feared when Trump first arrived in Ankara.
And as you say, months of work, of course, goes into organising these summits. So as you say, officials are happy for now. But of course, Trump was very critical of allies like Spain and the UK. Is this really the end of NATO, do you think, as we know it?
No, I don't believe so. But, whether Trump doesn't like NATO or does, the messaging changes. I think, if you look at the trend line, it's been pretty clear now and for a decade or so already, which is that the United States is going to stay in NATO, which is good, but it's going to do a lot less in terms of holding up the collective defence than allies were used to during the Cold War. For example, just at the NATO defence ministers meeting a couple of days before the Ankara summit, the US Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, announced a number of significant reductions in US contributions to the NATO full structure. Only 1 aircraft carrier now instead of 2, 1 strategic bomber instead of 2, far fewer drones, far fewer fighter aircraft. And Europe has had to scramble to sort of find in its own arsenals those capabilities to replace the US. We have the spectre of 5,000 US troops leaving Germany. Some of them may go to Poland, but it's not certain. The good news is that the United States continues to uphold nuclear deterrence for Europe. That's important, and stays in the NATO command structure. But everybody now is talking about NATO 3.0, whereby they mean a NATO which is going to be run, financed, resourced, operated, Europeans in the front line, much more a European show and less an American show than the NATO we've all been used to from our fathers and grandfathers.
And just on Iran, though, we saw, of course, the war flare up in the last couple of days. Trump says the ceasefire is over. Where do we go from here, Jamie Shea?
Well, I think we need to wait and see, because clearly the talks with Iran have not yet been broken off, even if they're not going anywhere fast. I think, Trump knows from opinion polling in the United States and even the Senate passing the War Powers resolution that this war is not popular at home, even with his own Republican MAGA base. The Americans want him to end the war, and he's got the midterm elections coming up. So, I don't think he voluntarily wants to get back into a full-scale war against Iran. For Europe, of course, it's very bad news, because if Trump, on the one hand, wants Europe to spend all of this extra money on defence, the last thing you want to do is tank the European economies with higher oil prices and inflation and higher debt costs, which are going to make it so much more difficult to fund defence. And, Europe was sort of hoping for a breathing space with the oil price going down to $60 a barrel. It's now up 5%. Who knows where it's going to go. And therefore, all of the kind of pressures that we had a couple of months ago, including, of course, things like, fertilizer not getting out of the Gulf to feed hungry people in Africa. All of those difficult scenarios are going to return. But let's wait and see, because I think it's Trump's interest to keep this memorandum of understanding going and talks with Iran going. And therefore, both sides may choose after, a flurry of activity to de-escalate once more.
OK, Jamie Shea, always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for joining us live this morning. And now for the humanitarian lens on all of this, we're joined here in the studio by Jean-Nicolas Beuz from the UNHCR here in Brussels. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, as we're reporting there, the war in Iran really flaring up again. What does that mean for your job and for, of course, migration flows and the humanitarian aspect?
So every time that bombs are being dropped or drones attacks occurs, we have people who are forced to leave their home, whether it's in Iran, in Ukraine, or in Sudan. So we can expect that some people last night had to flee their home because they were destroyed, but also many others will flee as a preventative measure because they are afraid that they are the next target. What we saw in the case of Iran, specifically earlier this year, is that according to official figure, more than 1 million people were displaced, mainly to rural areas to avoid the urban center, which were targeted, but have no come back, except that for 150,000 families who have their house destroyed, they will not be able to come back. So that's where the humanitarian, UNHCR and others, have to step in to provide some support with the authorities in the case of Iran.
And how are you providing that support when cuts are being, there's many cutbacks to your organisation? We're hearing as well Trump saying that the bombing could get, quote, much worse.
Every time we have to make choice. We have to decide, we have to prioritize who we are going to help. Are we going to help the mothers with 3 children or the mother with 7 children? Are we going to help the elderly people who have no support? Every time it's a choice because indeed, over the last 3 years, the humanitarian partners have seen the budget put at their disposal by donor countries, the US, the European Union, the Gulf countries, really shrink to almost less than half of what we had 3 years ago. And the needs are continuing rising, so therefore we are unable to help everyone.
And meanwhile, it's already 1 month since the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact has come into force. What has changed in your view?
So we will see the test is really the implementation in every of the 27 member states. We will see whether it will make the decision faster, fairer, whether it will make the life of the decision maker easier and less costly for us, the taxpayer, because it will be a more rapid decision, but also whether the principle, the protection principle behind the asylum system in Europe will help. Are we going to continue not detaining people, or people who seek asylum will be systematically detained? Are we going to give them legal aid so they can navigate the asylum procedure, which are quite complex, or are we going to leave them alone, figuring out what needs to be done with appeal, which are very costly for us? So the test now is really in the implementation.
And a big focus now, of course, on returns. And we saw technical talks take place recently here between officials from the Commission and the Taliban. What was your view of this encounter?
So what we need to remind everyone is that a country may be in different phases. We're speaking about Afghanistan with the Taliban. We're speaking about Syria with a new regime and probably more hope for people to return. And we're speaking about Sudan, where the return is not possible because it's a dire situation with the conflict and famine increasing. What is really important for the European Union is to keep the principle that nobody shall be returned to a possible situation of harm. And the harm can come from different actors, from different situations. So before sending anyone to Afghanistan, Syria, or Sudan, we need to ensure that there's an individual assessment. Will this person be able to regain control over their life without being put at risk?
Okay, Jean-Nicolas Beuz, thank you so much for coming into us here and being our guest on Europe Today. But now moving on to another story, the EU's anti-fraud wing, OLAF, has caught an international trafficking operation responsible for counterfeit condoms. They're untested, uncontrolled and unsafe. Jakob Janis has the story.
It would be an easy topic to laugh at if it wasn't a matter of public health. Brussels anti-fraud investigators at OLAF just broke up an international smuggling group. And criminals try to slip their illegal cargo past European border checks using a bizarre disguise. They declared the shipments as children's toys to evade customs controls. But there was a problem because the boxes did not contain toys at all. The cross-border network distributed more than 200,000 counterfeit condoms across the continent. Smugglers targeted 3 specific nations as their main entry hubs: Romania, Serbia and Spain. And when the border teams intercepted the fakes, it turned out they all come from a single source in China. And the total black market value of this illegal shipment sits at over 200,000 euros. But you see, potential health costs will be much higher. The European Anti-Fraud Office warns these fakes are untested and unsafe. Or, in plain English, they can spread infections and cause unplanned pregnancies. But there is also a bigger picture here. Fake condoms are just one part of the massive black market boom across the continent. And I'll give you an example. Last year, a global Interpol crackdown seized 57 million euros worth of counterfeit medicines. And this part is important. When it comes to Europe, the main targets were fake weight loss pens and cosmetic and performance-enhancing peptide supplements. For distribution, criminals do not even need to use the dark web anymore. They simply flood social media to sell their knockoffs straight to your feed. But back to our fake condoms. Brussels claims this raid proves European enforcement works, but also shows how criminals exploit the system. The continent still remains open to black market fakes, and with countless cases going unnoticed, it might look like Europe is left without protection.
Jakob Janis there. And now it's time for our World Cup segment. Well, following a day without World Cup action, after 27 days of games, goals and emotions, just 8 teams remain. 6 European, 1 African and 1 from the Americas. One side will be eliminated every day until Sunday. So here's 4 things that you should know about the quarter-finals. First, France probably remains the favourites, but standing in their way are Morocco, who just like in 2022 are the only African team left at this stage. This time though, they arrive as African champions and have a much more mature side, so expect a very good fight. Then Spain, who's the only team yet to concede a goal, with Unai Simon breaking the record for the longest run without conceding in the tournament's history. The question now, of course, can Belgium end that run? Now, the Red Devils definitely have some renewed confidence after knocking out one of the tournament's co-hosts, the United States. They've also faced Spain in the World Cup twice, losing in 1990 and winning in 1986 with a penalty shootout. And third, one team will be playing its first ever World Cup quarter-finals, and that's of course Norway. They've risen 12 places in FIFA's World Cup ranking since the start of the tournament, from 31st to 19th. If they beat England, they could enter the top 10. The clash will see 2 of the tournament's deadliest strikers go head-to-head. I'm talking, of course, about Erling Haaland and Harry Kane. So that is a match not to be missed. And finally, Messi. After leading Argentina to a late victory over Egypt with a goal and an assist, he became the very first player to score in 9 consecutive World Cup matches. Messi is the tournament's all-time assists hero, and he's the first player aged 30 or over to score 8 goals at a single World Cup. What record is left for him to break, and can he keep it going against Switzerland? Stay tuned and enjoy the games. But that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, reach out to us if you have any points, comments or questions. europetoday@euronews.com, that is our email address. But from all of us, thank you so much for tuning in. Take care and see you very soon on Euronews.